Afternoon, and thank you for joining the Cornet Mid-Atlantic chapter for this afternoon's event, Metro DC Real Estate Market Overview, a look at what's ahead. My name is John Matron, and I am this year's Chapter Vice President and Director of Real Estate and Facilities at GEICO. I would like to take a moment to thank our Education Committee for planning such an exciting event and discussion for us today, as well as our 2021 chapter sponsors for the ongoing support, which we greatly appreciate. Our speakers will be happy to answer questions at the end of the presentation, so please use the Q&A function at the bottom of your Zoom page to post any questions. We will try and address as many as possible. For today's discussion, we'll focus on the current real estate dynamics in Metro DC. Our panel of local senior real estate professionals will discuss the current state of the market from several different corporate and commercial real estate perspectives. It is now my pleasure to introduce our moderator, Rob Johnson, Executive Managing Director of Brokerage at JLL. With over 38 years in the commercial real estate industry, Rob has successfully led project teams representing many of the largest and most demanding corporations throughout the Mid-Atlantic region. And this experience has allowed him to interact and negotiate in excess of 800 real estate lease transactions representing over 35 million square feet for $5 billion in value. In addition to client-facing transaction experience, Rob has acted in mentoring and managing roles throughout his career. Rob is JLL's tenant advisory practice leader for the East Coast, while also leading more than 120 professionals in the Mid-Atlantic region. Rob is a current member and past president of JLL America's Brokerage Leadership Council, one of the 18 members of JLL's Brokerage Executive Committee, and has been the executive sponsor for JLL's Leadership Council Advisory Board since 2015. And with that, I will now pass it over to you, RJ.
Thank you, John. Good afternoon, everybody. Today we have a pretty cool session planned, and this will not be a typical reentry session. When your colleagues and the sponsors of Cornet were working with me to think about the content, we recognize that all of us as being part of the industry and part of the local business fabric community have already formed reentry plans. We're already doing it as we speak. So it's not going to be that kind of session. Instead, we're going to give you a high-level overview of how things are changing in the market right now today. We're going to frame some very important action items that you might consider in terms of leaving behind some ideas and strategies that will improve your business today. And we'll also leave you with some questions. We don't have all these answers, but we would like to seed the clouds with important questions for all of you to take back to your organizations. The driver of all this is the recovery is underway. Vaccines are increasingly rolled out. Caseloads are down. We believe that the new normal for American business, indeed, real estate and occupier and investor business in this region is right upon us. So our hope is to leave you with some action items today and some key questions that all of you as thought leaders can take back. So our panels today are active players in the industry. They're household names to many of you. Many of these names are well known, and I'll give a quick rundown of who our expert panelists are that live and work in this business every day. We have Dan Dooley, who is the regional leader of the leasing program at Tishman Speyer. We all know Tishman Speyer is a very active and leading real estate developer and investor business here in the DC metropolitan region. We've all known Dan for many, many years. We're also blessed to have Nate Edwards with us today. Nate is the senior executive running the Cushman & Wakefield research arm of that business. And Nate's going to lead the first segment and giving us a mile-high view of what the heck's going on out there and what we can expect Q2, 3, and 4 right in front of us. From the standpoint of the end user and the investor that owns those buildings, Sabrette Flokus is a long-established architect. She's a partner at Perkins Eastman. Sabrette has been very active in workplace strategies and designing future workplaces for companies for many, many years, and many of us know her. And lastly, when it comes to the bricks and mortar and the schedule and what does this stuff cost and what does it look like, Christina Leidy is here with us as well. She's a partner in MGAC, and she's going to give us some important insight about what comes next for pricing, schedules, and how the occupiers are going to shape what comes next. So let's start at the beginning. And the beginning is, let's start about a mile-high view and ask Nate to walk us through what's going on in our industry and the region generally. So Nate, take us to school. What's going on out there at that mile-high view?
Thanks, RJ. Got to share my screen here, so bear with me momentarily. Here we go. And take this from the beginning. Thanks for being with us, everybody. As Rob said, we got a mile-high view here, so I'm going to jump right in, starting with the local economy. And really, when we look at Washington, D.C., it's very clear that the D.C. metro region, including Northern Virginia, suburban Maryland, and D.C. proper, has continued to outperform compared to other major U.S. gateway markets in the COVID-19 pandemic. So we have some numbers here for you. On the left-hand side is the 2020 net jobs performance, again, for the year. So with DC losing 175,000 jobs, representing 5% of pre-pandemic employment. While that's very impactful, over 3 times more impactful at year end than what we lost in 2009. You can see compared to New York with still 1 million jobs lost at year end, representing 10%. And these other metros, LA, Boston, Chicago, still being in double digits, you can see that DC is faring comparatively very well. And this is after the bounce back at the bottom, about 325,000 jobs. So we're doing well comparatively as it relates to total jobs. And then when you drill into those jobs and isolate the office using portion of those jobs, the story gets even better as it relates to DC. So including the federal government in that number, which is a big office user metro-wide of about 45 million square feet of occupied investor-owned real estate. Office using employment's down less than 10,000 jobs at year end. So, the pandemic has been very bifurcated, but for office using sectors, we just haven't seen the impact we have seen to the broader job market, which is great news looking forward. Moving on here. A quick comparison to 2009. Again, when we look at the impact, you can see on the left-hand side here, the huge spike in unemployment early in the pandemic, but we are already below the rate that we had in 2009 at this point. And that 2009 rate, you can see how stubbornly high that was, even 3 to 4 years into the recovery of 2009. Forecasts we see predict that we will be projected below that unemployment rate very soon here, as well as on the right-hand side, you can see the great job growth we've seen as we've started to recover here. So 75,000 jobs in the third quarter, a little bit less than that in the fourth quarter, but just to put that into perspective, an average year's worth of employment in a good year is anywhere from 40 to 50,000 jobs in DC annually. So we're seeing almost a year's bounce back in jobs on a quarterly basis. And as you can see here, that's projected to continue well into the recovery. Moving on, some other things, some tailwinds that are behind us. One is political alignment. You can see, regardless of the party affiliation, we have had typically early in administration an alignment between the executive House and in the Biden administration. Now we have a razor thin margin going to the Democrats in the Senate. What does that mean for real estate? Well, you can see when those forces are aligned, we get better outcomes in real estate. So on the Northern Virginia side, you get nearly 500,000 square feet of additional positive absorption with alignment, and 1.3 million square feet of increased new deal activity on average in when the House and executive branch are aligned. Same thing in DC, nearly 1 million square feet more of net absorption and 1.3 million square feet of increased new deal activity in the marketplace. So it's good we have that alignment. Another thing to look forward to, and this is unique to DC, is the speed at which the market recovers. On the left-hand side here, you see this is looking back to 2009 and the recovery there, and pitting DC versus the competitive markets that we compete with to attract investment dollars. So 0% represents pre-recession employment levels, and you can see the light blue bar there in DC returning after a slight dip to pre-pandemic peak levels of employment in 13 quarters compared to in some cases, as you'll see in Chicago and LA, up to 8 years to recover. So DC not only is healthy as we're seeing right on the ground today, but also historically has returned to health much quicker than other gateway markets. And then another thing we see typically in DC as it recovers is a surge in net migration. So as DC, the DC metro region returns to health much quicker than other markets, we tend to attract those highly sought after, talented, well-educated workforce participants that flock to DC because the job opportunities are much more robust here than they are in other markets. In 2001, after the tech boom, as well as in 2009, coming out of the Great Recession, you can see that net migration spikes. In 2009, we were third in the country after Dallas and Houston in attracting this highly sought after workforce. So a couple things to look forward to if these traditional outcomes hold true as we continue to recover here in DC. Moving on to the Northern Virginia macro market here, we have on the left-hand side what we call the tri-slide. It pits new supply coming online in blue versus net demand in gray, with vacancy layered over the top in red. As you can see here, vacancy has been tightening in Northern Virginia going back to 2017. You can see this real balance between supply and demand, the blue bars versus the gray bars, very much in check with a much more disciplined supply pipeline and robust demand driving those vacancy rates down. A slight tick up in 2020, but all in all, really enviable stats here as it relates to the trends in vacancy in Northern Virginia. We have seen a little bit of a bifurcation in the market. You can see that on the right-hand side. Net absorption outside the Beltway, 800,000 square feet versus inside the Beltway at negative 500,000 square feet. So every submarket outside the Beltway, including Reston, Herndon, Tysons, and some others, have tightened over the course of 2020. Notable, what's driving that activity: technology, Intel community activity, cybersecurity, and government consolidation, government contractor consolidations. So great news there. The sublet market, a real barometer of health of the market, has ticked up, but really we're right back to where we were in 2017. And this includes all sublet options at 3.5 million square feet. When you dig into this number and try to isolate those full floor opportunities that have longer terms, market-based terms associated with them, you're actually down to about 900,000 square feet of real deals that could potentially impact the direct overall market. So very healthy as it relates to sublet space. And I'd just say DC wide, in terms of the amount of sublet coming on market, is in good shape compared to every other metro in the country. Quick note on District of Columbia, a little bit of the reverse happening in Washington, D.C. as it relates to Northern Virginia. A lot of supply coming online in blue, mundane demand not keeping pace with that supply. So we've seen vacancy tick up pretty significantly over the course of the last 6 years or so. Again, not a ton of COVID impact yet. We've seen some slowdown and some stalled leasing, but overall, the majority of the upward pressure on vacancy is coming from new supply. You can see that here. This is new supply coming online. We also have isolated here the vacant amount of new supply that's hitting the market. We've averaged about 600,000 square feet of new vacant supply per year coming online. That equates to about a 0.5 percentage point per year of vacancy just from new supply coming online below. But as you can see here, the trend is this supply cycle is really coming to its close. By 2023, we'll be real starved for new projects to choose from. A couple of those potentials here on the right, but the reality is pre-leasing requirements to kickstart these projects, as well as debt funding to fund the construction of these projects, is harder to come by today than it has been. So unlikely, unless a real big pre-lease happens, that any of the supply will come online. Much as was the case in Northern Virginia, sublet space in DC has ticked up, yet the real story is kind of getting into the weeds on it. So we're at just over 3% of inventory on an available basis in the sublet market. But again, digging into those and seeing what opportunities there are more long-term and more full floor opportunities that are going to attract credit-worthy tenants. You're down to under 900,000 square feet of real opportunities there, arguably very very solid in terms of what we're seeing compared to other markets. Co-working is a little bit of a different story. The co-working industry has been hit pretty hard, but the reality is at about 2.5 million square feet out of 100 million square feet of inventory, even if we do see additional closures, and we have some of those illustrated here on the upper right, it's not enough to really cause any broad distress in the overall market. And a lot of these users are going to pretty creative ends to lease the space they have. Final note here on DC, the majority of the softness in the market is concentrated in the core downtown submarkets of the CBD and the East End, where we're really seeing good activity. And the District of Columbia is on the periphery, the emerging markets that offer more of a mixed use feel of multifamily office and retail options. And you can see the bifurcation in vacancy when we group those submarkets together, continued tightening in those emerging markets like the Capitol Riverfront Southwest and NoMa, whereas the core markets are where we're seeing flight and anchoring projects in these emerging markets. With that, we'll transition back to RJ here. Thanks all for your time.
So Nate, in quick summary of what we've heard, this is a very, very good and compelling summary presentation. I think for our investor and occupier clients, the lesson seems to be the deleterious real estate effects of COVID have washed through the system. We're returning to normalcy, and we would expect that investors would experience the returns on rent growth that they expected and perform as a year or two ago, and that occupiers need to remain the same level of care and caution in planning their needs. So a lot of our clients out there are expecting a buyer's market for a long time, and that's probably not the right view, right?
Agreed. Yeah, a good synopsis. Yeah, the reality is, the recovery's happening. We're seeing upticks in activity here. The furtherance of vaccine is just going to make that progress that much faster. And as kind of an overarching theme, DC is typically the place to be early in a recovery. So keep that in mind as you're looking out there for opportunities in the market.
Great. So we're going to now transition to a poll question. The poll question that you're going to see on your screen in a moment is really about your company. Do you think your company, where you work and the teams you lead today, will you be requiring your employees to take a vaccine to come back to work once they're widely available late this spring and early summer? So just please go ahead and submit that. We think that we'll share the results because these are exciting times and no one has ever quite done this before. So all of us are doing this for the very first time. We'll give people just another few seconds. There we go. So what's your reaction to that? Nate and Sabret, you guys are very close to occupiers. What's your reaction to what a broad group thinks, and what are you hearing based on the firms you talk to?
Sabret, please go first.
Well, interestingly, one of our clients, Davis Wright Tremaine, many of you maybe had seen them in the market speaking about this, but they have mandated that they have to you have to be vaccinated to come back to the office. They look to the EEOC to make sure that they were compliant. They want to make sure ADA and that they're really being mindful about the human being but also about their work. So what Davis Wright Tremaine has done is that they said, you must be vaccinated if you opt to be able to come into the office. If you opt not to get the vaccination, of course, they're going to make accommodations for you at your distributed workplace, your home, or someplace else. But what they've really put down their foot, and they said any sort of company events, social gatherings, corporate events that everybody comes together, the holiday event, they are not going to allow people to come to those if they are not vaccinated. What I'm thinking, this is one example, but I'm really seeing that each company and even geographically may take a different approach to that. What about you, Nate?
Yeah, the majority of groups I've talked to haven't gone quite that far. Vaccination is strongly recommended, but has stopped short of a mandate to be back in the office. We'll see, I think, as this further kind of matriculates, how it comes out, and there could be, I think, more enforcement, more strict enforcement, perhaps moving forward. But that's the majority of what I've heard at this point.
So everyone, JLL is a large public company, and the current thinking from our legal department is we're not really sure, except we're going to go very careful, stay in front of the law, and watch trends. There are precedents, though, for public schools. Many public schools have long had a system that children would have to be vaccinated against communicable diseases to come back to school. So there is precedent for that. But here again, we have to remind each other this is a brave new world that no one's experienced. So what are the thoughts and leave behinds for especially the occupiers here on the call today to begin to maybe seed those clouds internally and be discussion leaders with your colleagues in the C-suite to make sure these questions are being thought of, because they are going to be quite material to us going forward. A related question to the vaccines is, what about work from home? We've heard a lot of lore. Remember back in May, office was dead. No one was ever going to get back to work again. And of course, as everyone on this phone, I think, predicted correctly, that was a bit of an overstatement. So, Dan, with all the occupiers that you talk to and the investor colleagues of yours, what's your sense about the future of companies requiring employees to come back to work?
And I think you all touched on it on the last subject a little bit. I think we'll probably gradually ease back into it. I don't think our company has been very aggressive on with Inspire, as you mentioned at the outset. We've been back since June 8th, but I will say we have about 10 to 20% show up every day. So we haven't mandated it, but we've been probably on the aggressive side of opening up early. So I think a lot of people will do that, and then maybe start doing what we were going to do initially, have kind of an A and B team, and then maybe go full steam ahead once they feel like people are fully vaccinated and whatnot. I don't think companies are going to mandate it, at least at the outset. And I think, if you just go even pre-COVID, huge multinationals had a lot of workplace flexibility, and smaller companies had a lot less. I think that flexibility you'll see more across the board, and it'll be a spectrum of how companies deal with that. But I don't see people mandating it, at least right away.
So Christina and Sabret, one of the themes that the architectural partners we work with us tell us what the future will be is this, that work from home has always been a thing. It's always been an accepted part of a mobile, agile workplace. But going forward, it'll be more of the thing. It'll be more accepted. So when this is all over and stabilized, there'll still be a greater percentage of the population being mobile. Do you guys agree with that?
Christine, go ahead.
Brett, yeah, go ahead, Sabret.
Absolutely. Depending on what article you pick up and you read, right now, 50% of the workforce, if the people are saying, are not going to come back to the office. I think that number is probably a little bit high. The reason that we go to the office every day is to make sure that there's connection and collaboration. Making sure that, why do you come to the office? So if I take a step back and say, why do we have an office? Why would you start to look at that? What does it make sense, and how do you start to look at the planning of this? I think it's really important to take a step back and say, wait a second, what were the purpose initially of why we came into the office? Was it a more hierarchical sort of structure of where you were required to come into the office? Or was it much more hub and spoke, where people would come into the office because they would gain something from it? I can speak to us and at Perkins Eastman. It's really interesting because extraordinary innovation and serendipitous sort of connections don't happen over Zoom. As much as we try to have this sort of conversation, to schedule innovation really doesn't work. And it is as authentic as we all intend it to be, it's not occurring. So I see that people definitely, is there going to be a hybrid and we're all going to go back and sit in the office for 40, 60 hours a week? Absolutely not. But I see that there is a tsunami change here in how people work and understanding that they have an opportunity to be able to do this. One of our clients too, they've started to assign and say, how do we look at this? Someone that works 2.6 days a week, they get an office and all of the associated technology associated with it. Somebody that says they're going to commit to 2.4 days a week, they don't get an assigned office. So that may be one of those of understanding and measuring how space will be in the future. But Christine, what are you hearing and what are you seeing?
Sure. It really does depend on the type of business that each company performs. So for instance, our law firm clients, there's really not much of a difference in how they operate now to maybe a year ago before the pandemic, since most of them are in closed office or in larger workstations, which permit them to socially distance and not have to wear their mask in the office. But other firms, such as a technology company that has mostly open office and they're much more dense on the floor, if you will, what we're starting to see, and we've really been seeing it for a little while, is that, and we all know this term, right, resumercial, they start breaking out more of those private me type spaces for people to get away from those compact, densely workstation type spaces, just to provide people to get a little bit of a breakaway. So it really does depend on the business, I guess, is part of my answer. But it also, we have not really seen a huge difference in the way that companies are making changes to their plans. What is happening is, to Sabret's point, we're starting to see that folks are coming back, they're trickling back to the office. So the folks that need to be there every day, that are more support, I guess, if you will, they need to be there every day or most days of the week. But we're not seeing that 100% of the office place is going back day one. I think it's going to be a slow trickle. And we'll talk about this a little bit later in our conversation, because safety is a huge concern. And just the psychological impact of this pandemic and how comfortable people are, and whether or not they feel safe returning is going to relate to their comfort level.
Well, Christina, that's great news, because JLL was planning to move our Virginia office, and I'm pretty sure then we're not going to have a bench and they're not going to ask me to sit at one. That's the best news I've heard on a given Wednesday. That's perfect.
Great.
Related to this is the culture part. I think studies from Gartner and Deloitte and others suggest that 74% of knowledge workers, which is everybody on this call and the people they work with, want to be in an office at least some of the time, 74%. And most C-suite leaders believe that culture and performance and camaraderie actually suffers if people aren't together. So, Christina, that seems to support the view that we're going back to the offices, but it might be different as to density and design. Is that fair?
That's fair. Yes.
To jump in and on there, I think these numbers are going to move around for a while. I think it's interesting. A Gensler study showed that the most favored thing was working full time. That got the highest response, and then the second highest was 1 to 2 days of flexibility. And the other two groups that wanted more flexibility, their number one concern was health, was COVID. So I think as we resolve COVID, you'll see more of a traditional outlook. Sorry to jump in there.
Yeah, no, thank you, Dan. From that perspective is important. One of the things we've seen is how different demographics react to this. In our culture, I'll share and get reaction from our panelists, and I'm especially interested in Cushman & Wakefield, Nate, what's going on there. Our cadres that say 50 years old and older are attending the office less than the younger population. The younger folks are here often, and they would be here in greater densities if the law permitted it, but not so much the older demographics. Nate, is that what you're experiencing at C&W as well?
It's a little bit of a mixed bag. So what we're seeing, interestingly enough, is some of the senior executives that have home offices that suit their needs well have actually given up their private in-office space to their younger millennial employees who often are living in tighter apartments or with roommates or that sort of thing. But I would say my own view in general is interesting. I'm seeing a lot of the mid-career kind of really call it the partner track type employees really make an effort to be seen and heard. And the younger employees, some of whom may be treating it more as just a job rather than a career at this point, have been a little bit less sparse. So, and then obviously with some of the older demographics, to your point, that the health concern might be a little bit more your 60 plus age brackets. So it's a little bit of a mixed bag, but what I would say in general is that mid-career professional are the ones we're seeing a lot of in the office around Cushman and Wakefield.
And dress code has changed, Nate. I wish I'd figured this out in like May and bought Stock and Page jeans. Clearly, they've sold a lot of jeans in the last year, no doubt about that. So let's go ahead and switch topics and talk about market timing opportunities. This is something that our panel worked on a lot and getting ready for all the registrants today. I'm going to just start a conversation that I'll drag Nate in about leasing. One of the things we've been doing is educating our clients that to Nate's point, that the market is not terribly soft. There is robust activity. Tour volumes are up. And we're warning our occupier clients that they shouldn't presume that market conditions that applied 9 months ago are going to apply currently, especially in larger blocks of space. I was on a call last week with a client, and my message was something like, well, if your need was 10,000 feet, I wouldn't be terribly anxious, but your need is 3 floors, I'm fairly anxious. Because that inventory tends to go quickly, and there's a supply squeeze when new supply comes online, which is years. So what the advice we're giving our occupier clients is these are now problems, and they shouldn't do their forward windshield planning looking for the rear windshield, because those facts no longer apply. Nate, is that, I guess the tenant rep brokers and Cushman are sharing the same thing with their clients?
Yes, I mean, we're definitely, I would bifurcate the market a little bit. Northern Virginia has been supply constrained since for the better part of a decade, coming out of the 2009 crash, which really, it decimated a lot of developers in that time frame. But since then, what little, particularly speculative construction has come online has done very well. And while we are seeing some continued consolidation, which have kept a couple of options for very large users in the market, in general, we're definitely seeing that squeeze of very few options for those, call it multi-floor users. DC, the dynamic, and I referenced this in the slide part, was we have seen a lot of supply, but it's a flight to quality market. Those new options aren't going to be around for much longer. And while it is a lot of musical chairs, the amount of new supply coming on in the out years is going to be dramatically reduced. So if you have a large requirement, being out in front of your must sign by date is as integral as it ever has been.
And related to this, Christina, is the reality of getting space permitted and constructed. So I think you had some amazing insights that we thought you might want to share with our colleagues here about what's in front of us for the next quarter or 2 or 3 about construction pricing and lead times. Sure.
Well, let me get my crystal ball out, right? I think that what we're going to see is in quarter 3, quarter 4 is somebody's going to turn on the faucet really hard. All of a sudden, what we envision is that all of these projects that essentially were put on hold a year ago are now people are going to be more comfortable moving forward with those decisions now that we've learned more over the past 9-10 months. So what we really do think is going to happen is that permits are going to take longer. Picking the correct contractor and partner on your project is going to be even more important, because you're going to want to make sure that you have your subcontractors and contractors locked in so that your project is getting that attention. So with that, prices are going to probably go up again, because you're going to have to pay a premium to lock in those subs and those general contractors that are going to get extremely busy. So it's really critical, I think, at this juncture, if you know what you want to do, the faster you can get ahead of that curve, if you will, the better I think that you will be, and the shorter time you will have. And how that will affect the real estate market with lease expirations is just even more important to your earlier comment. If you've got a large requirement coming ahead of you that may take a little bit longer because of what we potentially see could be some delays in the market, and we haven't even started to talk about supply chain and those impacts as well. I think that if you can get ahead of this right now is the time to definitely do it.
And Christina, this applies to, of course, furniture, fixtures, and equipment purchasing, long lead time items, and even the permit cycle. So one of the leave behinds we have for our colleagues today is to get on the front foot of internal planning and moving down the road, because I think we are anticipating a kind of rush. We coined an analogy in one of our calls where we've been busy, very busy over the last 9 or 10 months, but it's coming up on May, and then everyone's going to decide at the same week they'd like to go to the beach in July, and getting hotel accommodations are very hard with 10 weeks notice. So guys, let's get on our front foot and think about this in advance so it doesn't sneak up and ambush us, because that's really coming. Related to this also is the future of occupier leasing. So Dan, you're on the front lines of doing some of the larger, more impressive transactions in the region. What are your thoughts about best practices for occupiers now, 2 quarters and 3 quarters from now?
And by best practices, are you in the Christina range, or are you talking about in terms of what they're looking for? No,
well, I'll come back to Christina. So be warned, Christina, you're next.
Yeah.
But
I think we are seeing a lot more focus on people on things centered around kind of health. People want to make sure we're getting a lot more questions about cleaning protocols, air quality. Those have moved to the forefront, I think. I would say that I've heard this from several large architects too. They are struggling, and you're watching it in their decision making in terms of how long it's taking, how much they should correct to everything we're talking about today. We had a law firm that was 100,000 feet, drop to 75 and have a third of it be flex space and 2/3 of it be traditional, and they still haven't made a decision because they're not sure that's the right thing. So I think they're a little bit in flux, but I think everybody is planning in terms of best practices, and everybody is planning for more flexibility. And unfortunately for the landlords, most of them, not all of them, because some have actually gone the other way because they want to have a healthier, more private environment, but most of them are downsizing at least to some degree because of the plans for flexibility.
And Dan, what's going to happen about the drive for like HEPA filters and HVAC supply and return ducts, touchless elevator controls? That's CapEx expense and additional operating expense. How's that going to be manifested in real estate transactions going forward?
I think the jury's out on a specific solution. I would say we've already been doing a lot more cleaning, and anything we install new, if we're doing a new bathroom right now, if we're building a new building, it's as much touchless as you can possibly put in. But to go completely take a building that was, last renovated 10 years ago or something, or 15 years ago, and make it completely touchless and put in a DOAS system, say, versus the, 20 or 30-year-old system it might have, there are some capital constraints to that. And then there's pricing constraints. Those buildings that probably have every single thing on a big corporate user's checklist, those are $80 to $90 a foot in Washington, D.C. terms. And it's just a matter of what you prioritize. I mean, we are putting the license plate technology in, so you don't have to touch anything, opening the garage door, when you're getting to a parking garage. We've allocated a little more money towards porters and a little less in other areas to offset that in terms of just somebody walking around all day, wiping down bathroom doorknobs and elevator knobs. We have people in our lobbies helping push the button so occupants can get on the elevator and not touch anything. We, of course, have in our newer buildings destination controls, which are a little more touchless. But my personal view is you're only as good as your weakest link in anything in life. And if people are expecting perfection, even in that $90 building, they're not going to necessarily get perfection if somebody comes into work unvaccinated or doesn't wear a mask where they're supposed to, or whatever. Those issues are still greater risks than the other ones we're talking about. But we and I think most of our peers, frankly, have put MERV 13 filters as a standard. I think that's here to stay. Going heavier than that, and a lot of the things that people want you to do, there will be a healthy tension between health and then performance and meeting temperatures, and then also meeting the Energy Star requirements that the district's imposing on us. Very difficult if you go much further on the HVAC than we've gone. So there's a lot of competing interests here, and I know we and I'm sure our peers are doing the best to make our buildings as safe as possible, but there's risk all around us when we go to the grocery store and everywhere right now, and we're trying to be safer than those other public venues, but we're not guaranteeing perfection by any stretch.
Perfect. So let's bring Sabret and Christina into this conversation. How are we going to get to these elevator lobbies, guys? We do the math, and we're in a building at Tyson's, which is not very well occupied, and I've seen some spreadsheets which are terrifying, because when you think about spooling up people in groups of 3 in the elevator, how do you get upstairs to work? So what's going to happen with getting in elevators and getting through elevator lobbies this spring and summer?
It's really interesting, RJ, because you're absolutely right. And as Dan spoke, you can down all of these items, but still, how do you get up there? The easy comfort is take the stairs, but the difficult is that you're just taking all of those occupants and putting them in a different sort of environment and spreading it through this. Something that we've been speaking about is do schedule times for elevators and creating zones and enabling people to come into the building at certain times throughout the day. I do believe that the workday is going to be augmented considerably, going in earlier, maybe staying later, and that it will be a longer day of working. So being able to schedule those times. I've also thought about, do you create office bubbles? Does JLL gets the time between X and Y, and they can exit the elevators during those times. Of course, you're going to have outliers. You're going to have your clients, your visitors that are going to come in that sort of disrupt that. So that's what we're seeing and what I'm seeing. I don't know, Christine, have you seen something differently? Christina.
No, not really. But I will say that, in our industry, we've actually been in our office and in the workplace over this pandemic. So we've been living this, although when 100% of the office does return, it's definitely going to pose a challenge to our property management friends and how they get people in and out of the building. We have stairs. I mean, in our own building, we're using the elevators to go up and stairs to come down. Now, obviously in tall buildings, that's a problem. And for people with, accessibility issues, that's also an issue. But back to my earlier comment, when we have 100% of the staff in the office, that's probably going to be later in the year. So I think initially, when we have a smaller percentage of people in the building, it should be a little easier to handle. But I think you're definitely going to have to stagger those people coming into the building, since you can only have 4 people on an elevator at any given time, and you have to still keep the social distancing in the building lobby as well. So it will be a challenge, but I think it's definitely doable.
Great, thank you for that update, Christina. So Dan, a question for you about the cost and risks associated with COVID cleaning. So I'm pretty sure that Cushman & Wakefield from now on is going to suggest that landlords pay all the cleaning, all the CapEx, all the emergency, and we're going to learn from Cushman & Wakefield how to do that best. But on a serious side, occupiers are focused on shifting risk to owners, and owners are focused on managing risk. How's that risk allocation and cost allocation going to be managed for the legal liability, the operating costs for the buildings, and the CapEx? How are we going to get through this?
I think on the cleaning, I do think, landlords are going to have to absorb a little bit more cleaning costs. We have like an extra porter, let's just say, in a certain size building that's going around doing the wipe downs and things like that. it's an arm wrestling match that you and I might have on a deal one day, but it's, those are things out of our control. We're responding, kind of almost fall in a force majeure category of events that we're trying to respond to. And then, like I said, if we will put a certain amount of touchless technology in kind of on our nickel, but I don't think we or probably any landlord can afford to do an HVAC overhaul for $60 or $70 a foot, or just changing all the faucets out and all the buttons out, and buttons in an elevator panel, changing that to destination elevators is you're talking about millions of dollars, potentially per building, depending on the building size. So, but I do think we will take care. We will be spending extra dollars. We already are, with additional personnel to keep the basic touch points as clean as possible. I think tenants will have to clean, their own spaces, meaning if they have an event. We're cleaning them like we normally do on a given night, but if they have it early on in COVID, if somebody had an office with a COVID person, they would spend $25,000 as if it had been a, kind of a toxic spill or something. I think we've maybe, the science, I think, tells us that if you just leave that space alone for a period of time, in a rather short period of time, the virus does degrade. I'm not an expert on it, but I think the bigger issue is the airborne. I think we've learned the bigger issue is the airborne. So it's more about policies and practices. If we could get the community, and I'll get off my soapbox, wearing masks right now. We have some tenants that won't do it when they come in, but if you can get people following just kind of the ABCs that Dr. Fauci has laid out, that will probably get us farther than any of the major capital improvements will.
So Dan, this all comes under the classification of nobody's ever done this before. So it's negotiable, and we'll approach each other with respect and clarity of arguments. And as an industry and professionals, we will feel our way through it. We don't know exactly how this is going to do that. So before we get into some Q&A, we have some pretty cool questions coming in the Q&A now. Here's a broad question. And for many of us here on the panel and the audience are in the service provider business. We provide services to people like you, Dan, as a really an investor client, and we provide services to many of the occupiers here on the call as well. What are our thoughts collectively about what our clients are going to expect from us different? Certainly in this period of time, expectations of value delivery, skill sets, work tempo, it's going to change. What's the future? And Nate, since your industry is the closest to mine, I'll ask you first. What's the future of what our clients will expect from us?
Well, I think we were seeing a lot of it going into COVID. There a certain, really, let's be real about it. Real estate's a commoditized business. So there's a lot of pressure on fees. There's a lot of fee sharing. I think value to the user is there's pressure on that. So I think it's value for what you get, and I think there's a lot of discussions right now. Obviously, investors and landlords are more willing to negotiate around tenant sensitivities in a softer market. We'll see if that changes. But when I look back on the early pandemic, the propensity of the occupier side versus the investor side to work together to come to real solutions in a time of pandemic, I thought was very noteworthy. We saw, for those who could demonstrate a financial need, we definitely saw the investor and landlord community meet that need and often trade some near-term relief for long-term solutions. I think that flexibility is what it's all about today, not only in lease terms, but throughout the transaction process and throughout the life cycle of an occupier in the building. And I think it's that collaborative nature that's going to continue to kind of solidify who the winners continue to be in the market.
So Brett and Christina, you guys are very closely in the services and your clients are similar to ours. If you had to give us a crystal ball, what will our clients be wanting differently from us a month or a year from now than they have in the past?
I'll go first. Or go ahead.
No, go ahead. I would like.
Well, I will say from our perspective on, working on behalf of our client, that we're going to want to definitely have the discussion about some of the items that Dan mentioned earlier, because our concern would be how much of their tenant improvement dollars is actually going to go towards those costs and would limit our clients' costs towards doing the pretty stuff. So that would be one thing that definitely, as a consideration, would want to dig deeper into that with you all. And then I think as far as just I mentioned safety earlier, working with the commercial real estate teams, property management teams to come up with a good safety plan, protocol plan with the building so that we can share that with our client. Because so much of this is psychological as it is social, and making sure that they're comfortable entering and exiting the building in a safe manner where they don't come into contact with people as much as they, don't want to. The other thing we're going to start to see a lot, and I think this is going to help people feel more comfortable, is the use of sensors. Putting sensors in spaces so that if you go to a shared working situation, you know who sat in your seat before you, whether it was cleaned, who all's been in your space. So it really will give visibility to people coming in and out. So just working closely with the landlord team and real estate team on those types of items will be, I think, what we see moving forward.
Perfect. So go ahead, please.
No, I would say that what the occupiers are really going to be looking from the design side is uncovering the why. Why are we going back to the office? I do believe if we look and state you need to because we said so, that's going to be unsuccessful. We're seeing that you can hire anybody in any demographic area and they can work remotely. So it's really working with our clients and helping them understand the experience that they're going to get when they come into an environment and helping them uncover with their policies, with their sort of new protocols as to what that space should be, not just being able to identify it within a spreadsheet, but really looking at that destination sort of environment.
So Brett, that really gets to the notion of workplace and occupancy planning, that how people are going to work. So we only have a few minutes left, so there are a bunch of questions out there. So one, I'm going to direct to Dan. We have a question about parking. So in most of our locations all around the region, tenants, if anything, wanted more parking. So are we headed into a future where now I'll be negotiating with you, Dan, to say we have the right to take up to 3.6 per thousand, but I can drop whatever I want as below as 2 per thousand. I'll let you know what I need and you'll provide what I need. When I come to you with that in DC, am I going to be able to persuade you to do that?
Well, that was very much a suburban ratio you gave me there, RJ. But in all seriousness, I'm looking at a study in front of me. Parking has moved up to number one in terms of all amenities in current surveys that employees want. I shouldn't say nobody. A lot of people are going to be reluctant to take public transportation for a while. And so how we manage that is going to be difficult, but parking's very finite, even whether you're in the suburbs or downtown. Downtown it's like 1 per 1,500. So, you can only if you're putting people in at 1 per 100 or even 200, there's only so many people that will be able to park. You also have people who are saying, I don't want you touching my car. One way to increase parking would be to go to a full valet. And jam people in, but people are saying, I don't want somebody else in my car. So it's part of the tension that we'll have on a lot of issues.
So Dan, it's clear we're all going to have to learn some new tricks because landlords rely on parking income for net income and tenants want to be more nimble about parking. So we're going to have to figure that out. So here's some other questions that are interesting coming in. In terms of inside the Beltway or outside the Beltway statistics, do we think that there'll be any changes in commuting patterns related to health and people feeling uncomfortable being in large masses? So would this have people maybe wanting to be in a segregated hub and spoke system in remote offices or close in? And the basis of the question, I think, was 4 years ago, everyone wanted to be in an urban packed center. What do you think about that, Nate, in your research and indications? How will that change?
Yes, it's a great question. I haven't, anecdotally, I haven't seen much migration due to COVID, but for general kind of commute patterns, it's been happening even pre-COVID. The other thing we saw coming into the pandemic was because of the pricing differential between downtown office space and the suburbs, a lot of kind of value-oriented user groups had already chosen close in Northern Virginia or close in Maryland, as opposed where you can get a Class A building for a more competitive rate than even Class B downtown. So that dynamic is has already been happening. Differences in corporate tax policy often drive a lot of that. The one user group that we've seen kind of decentralized recently it would be someone like a CoStar who's kind of doing pop-up locations because they want their employees to be in the office. They want that synergy. But it's all over the map. We're tracking at least 3 groups right now out of Bethesda who have chosen to relocate downtown. And that's more of a ploy to kind of poach talent to be where the young people want to live. So I'd say it's an all of the above strategy. You notice downtown with development patterns, a lot of it's happening on the west side of the city where your senior executives tend to commute from north and west. So I haven't seen as much related to COVID and health at this point as other broader long-term concerns.
Well, I guess related to the health concerns would be a question that really all of you guys could provide some help with. There's a standard being talked about, what's called the WELL, Health and Safety Rating Seal. It's a commonly in vogue topic. Dan, will we expect to see your branded marketing materials advertise that standard? Is that something that you'll be seeking in your assets?
I think going forward we will. I actually, I think was involved in the first WELL lease. It was with the industry association that does that a couple of years ago. So I'm pretty familiar with what it is. But yeah, I do think that is an area that, will be the new LEED. What LEED was 15 years ago, I think it may not reach that status, but it will move towards that status compared to it's been around already for 4 or 5 years. And I think that this event will launch it a little more.
So in addition to being good operating governance, it's also good business for marketing and sales to make your tenants feel safe that you offer good assets. So Brad, Christina, what do you guys think as you're on the front lines there?
I would definitely say WELL is going to probably take more of a precedence than even LEED. And the reason I say that is LEED, everything now is so LEED intent, right? DCRA has the green code. So already we're planning and designing to a LEED intent type space in all of our projects. So I think the WELL standard would be fantastic to see that more often. And I think health and safety are such a huge priority right now that it would be great to see that take the lead over LEED, if you will.
I would have to agree. WELL is about an ongoing operation where LEED is a one-time sort of certification, and it really starts to embark upon wellness and well-being of people in the office. So I see that this will continue to evolve and the design of buildings will continue to evolve. One of the aspects of the WELL building is operable windows. Well, none of us have operable windows today, so it'll be interesting.
And so Brett and Christina, part of this would be the big push for spec suite leasing and construction in the last few years. Do you think there's an overlay, a synergy where marketing spec suites would also be using like the WELL brand, that theme continuing?
Very much so. And we're seeing such a huge influx of spec suites being built by landlords, which is another great way to get ahead of that curve I mentioned earlier. We're seeing that landlords are going ahead and taking that risk and building out those spec suites, and they're getting leased really quickly because now clients can just basically make minor changes to those spec suites and move right in. So it's great. But to your question about WELL being part of that, I definitely think that would be a great selling point for sure.
Well, great. I'm ever respectful of the time of the important people on this call. So I think we're going to try to move into a closing round here. And this is a question that is for all of you. This has been unlike anything we've experienced in our business lives. What's the thing that surprised you all the most from March of 2020 to March of 2021 in terms of COVID and our industry?
I'll go first, I guess. First, I have to answer Jeff Romans. I'm going to go gnats, and I want to see what Dan says. The biggest change in our industry, I would say, and again, it's been interesting being on the construction side because the biggest change we've seen is just how we're treating job sites. But we're working, we're out there every day, we're on job sites, we're in your buildings, we're working with our clients to build out their spaces. So there's been other than having to work in a mask and socially distance and not be able to be in close contact with one another and work in DC with it being sort of a ghost town, that would probably be the biggest difference, I would say right now, and traffic is fantastic. So that would be the biggest difference I think I've seen.
So Brett, Nate, what have you guys seen that surprised you the most?
I would have to say is the biggest difference, or not even a difference, the thing that surprised me the most is how easily everybody moved from their office into their distributed area. If I think about this 10 years ago, 5 years ago, could we have all done this as easily? Absolutely not. And what's interesting is some of the early adopters of technology are having some of the same challenges of us, more seasoned individuals. But I am seeing that people just kind of figured out these workarounds. I'm also seeing the latitude for informality has really been embraced. So somebody's dog runs across the nobody cares. Somebody's kid's screaming. You just say, oh, okay, well, that's okay. We'll give you a moment and let's come back to you. So if we would have said that would have been a prediction in 2020, the informality and the ability to embrace technology, I'm not sure that would have been in my narrative.
How about you, Nate? What shocked you the most?
I would say just the massive amount of government regulation that we've seen and the corporate response to it, I think is, no matter how you feel about it, impressive in some way. And then especially, good or bad, the data on this, or at least the messaging around the data, is all over the place. And when I look at it, I see for, age groups under the age of 60, 99.9% survival rate. That amount of government response to that kind of, those metrics it's overwhelming, the amount of kind of faith I think we put into the government mandates. I just thought that was pretty notable.
Fabulous. Hey, Dan, take us home. What was the most surprising thing to you?
Yeah, I won't waste time totally repeating everything Brett said, but I think if we had planned on this without a pandemic, I think we all may have needed to hire McKinsey or somebody to figure out what we're going to do and who's going to lead this and what days we're going to have meetings, and somehow it just happened. We all went home and we just did it, and so that was a surprise. In a different vein, just to bring up another point, I am surprised and pleasantly so. I think initially with the stress that was put on everybody, landlords and tenants. There were certainly cases of need, and there were certainly, some that were overreaching and just being aggressive and looking to take advantage of it. I think that was all early noise. I think at the end of the day, the people who could pay paid, and the people, mostly retailers that struggled, I think were largely accommodated by landlords where they could be. So I think that initial defensiveness and aggressiveness resolving fairly quickly into cooperation was a pleasant surprise.
Great. Well, everybody, out of respect for your time, I'm going to turn this back to John to close us out. And it's been my pleasure to spend an hour with all of you this afternoon. So, John, what comes next?
All right. Well, thank you, Dan, Sabret, Nate, Rob, Christina, for your time this afternoon. I've got a good page and a half here of notes to take home with me. So really, really appreciate your time. And for all those who attended the Zoom, thank you for joining in, and please keep an eye out for upcoming events from the chapter. Specifically for new members, we have a new member orientation that'll be held March the 16th to learn more about the chapter and the executive committee. And stay tuned for further updates on upcoming events. We hope to see y'all soon. So thank you again for joining. Thanks, panelists, for your time. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.